Hi, Michael.
Hey, Yuli, how are you doing? Okay, it looks like all of our attendees are joining the webinar right now. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Yuli. Um, Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This webinar has got a very large audience from people joining us from all over the world. We're really excited here at Midstream to have so many of our partners, our clients, friends from all over the world join us. And this is actually our first ever Webinar Wednesday here at Midstream Lighting. It's going to be a series that we're going to be producing and putting out there to help support, educate, and work with our clients and our partners all over the world, basically. So welcome. Today's webinar is all based on the 7 lessons learned in apron floodlighting. And we're joined by Yuli Grigg, who has spent a lot of time over the years focused on this very topic. So hopefully everybody will get a lot from this session today. So before we get going, a little bit of webinar protocol for everybody who has joined us. You are actually all muted. However, you're still able to engage and ask us questions during the session by typing into the Q&A section on both desktop and mobile. So what we would really like you to do is make sure throughout the session, if you have any questions that you wish to answer, feel free to type them. We'll be able to answer both with Yuli replying to the questions, or I can simply type the answers to you if it's something a little bit lower level about the session. But the aim will be throughout this to be speaking to you and getting your questions answered as we go. After the session, there will be a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording, a link to any of the resources we mention, and links to register any upcoming webinars so you can get them in your diary straight away, as well as a really quick survey at the end. It's 4 questions. It will take you 2 minutes. It's just to help us evaluate how the session went and what we could do for you in the future on our future webinars. So today's agenda, we'll do some really quick introductions to both myself and Yuli, who's on the call. And we'll also do an introduction, a very light introduction to who Midstream are, because I know that a lot of people who've joined this webinar have been passed the information via colleagues or partners of ours. So we'll do a really brief introduction to who we are before we go into the 7 lessons learned, which is the full meat of this session. And of course, at the end, we will finish any Q&A questions off with time permitting. So on the call today, you've got myself. I'm head of marketing here at Midstream Lighting. I've got over 10 years of experience working in marketing across different sectors, from luxury, automotive, to technology, through to digital brands. And I'm here at Midstream Lighting, driving the marketing division forward to help us work with our clients, dealers, partners, end users all over the world in engaging in what we do. And the real person who's actually doing most of this webinar is Mr. Yuli Grigg. He's the co-founder and commercial director here at Midstream Lighting. And he's been doing apron lighting specifically for, I think, well over 10 years now, and has a vast array of experience in the industry, working across all of our sectors. But today our focus will just be on aviation. He's also been appointed as an export champion by the UK's Government Department of International Trade. So even though we are a UK-based company, he has vast experience of working across markets all over the world. So Yuli, before we actually get going into the main part of the webinar, which is the 7 lessons learned, it'd be great if you could give everyone a really quick introduction to who we actually are here at Midstream Lighting.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Michael, for a nice introduction. Greetings, everybody. We do find ourselves in pretty strange times, and we do hope that all of you are safe and are working as remotely as possible, and looking after your loved ones and those who are close to you and your colleagues. So it's a great opportunity to speak to all of our old friends and contacts and customers and partners and end users, and also those that may have come across our webinar and our company for the first time. So for those that don't know us, or for those that haven't maybe engaged with us in a while, well, what is and who is Midstream Lighting? Well, just as a summary, you know, we are a full cycle manufacturer of LED floodlighting systems, and we focus predominantly on the aviation sector. We do have quite a lot of activity in the maritime, so those are seaports and sports sectors. But I think it'd be fair to say that airports, aviation apron, floodlighting is the bread and butter for our business since we've started, and we've been doing this for about 10 years. So what makes us different to the others is probably that we are real experts in these sectors, and we are experts in the design and implementation. So we don't just look at the products, but we are looking at the whole solution, from designing the products to meet your requirements as an airport, to ensuring that we can do the photometric design to comply with the international standards in which you operate, and to ensure that our products are fit for purpose, they are robust, and they work in a whole sector of different environments. We are a UK company. We do manufacture most of our products in the UK, and we have a line in Romania too, to ensure that we can comply with any requirements post-Brexit. And we export to over 60 countries. So, and that list is growing. So wherever you are in the world, we can definitely work with you. We can help. We don't mind the time difference. We're happy to work all across different time sectors. And so we'd love to hear, from anybody who feels that they're far away. Then, that's very exciting for us. And just a brief thing, we manufacture products, but they are completely unique to us. We do have our own proprietary optics. We have our own proprietary designs around the products themselves, which are made really for apron applications. So that's what makes it unique. It's made for this application. And our team, amazing R&D team in Italy, with that technical office, which really continues to drive R&D and design based around the sectors in which we operate. We don't want to get involved in street lighting. We're not doing office lighting. We really specialize in the things that we do, which is predominantly apron, maritime, and sports. And so our aim with Michael coming on board recently is to position ourselves from a product business to a thought leader in each of those 4 verticals, being aviation, maritime, sports, and horticulture. So hopefully this webinar is one part of that process, and there'll be lots of interesting content that we plan to generate over the coming months. Apart from webinars, it'll be guides, it'll be things that you could read through our new website, which will be launching soon too. Probably a couple of words to just say about aviation. Just at a glance, we've completed over 100 airport projects globally. So that works from major international hubs, 50, 60 million passenger year, to small regional airports. And of course, their requirements quite often are different. And our knowledge is centralized in one team, in our technical center, which means that our clients always benefit from that real experience of one team that's worked on hundreds of projects. And when we say hundreds of projects, that means those are which have been completed, installed. In reality, we've worked on many hundreds of projects at different stages of development. So they could be in tendering, they could be at the moment, for example, postponed, or they could be in master planning stage. So the experience that you get from our team is really many hundreds, if not thousands, of aprons designs done over the last 10 years. And I think that's also quite unique. Compare that to big companies that have regional offices that may not centralize their knowledge. So if you're working, for example, in Egypt and you get an Egyptian team, that might be excellent, but they may not have the experience of working in projects in the Middle East or in Norway or in the US. So we centralize that in one place. And another thing is that we have real insight from projects by actually being on site. So we've been to all of these airports. We've been on every single apron. We've measured the light levels at the beginning, and we've measured them at the end, 2-3 years later. We've participated in the trials. We've lived in certain countries when we were going through tendering stages and things, to really understand how our products behave in the field, not just on paper and not just in simulation. So I think that's really important. We've really been and walked the apron in hundreds of these airports. And we're able to work on lots of standards, whether it's ICAO or the European normatives or CAP 168, which is the UK standard, which it looks like UK will be returning to post-December, post-Brexit, or the Australian standards, or indeed the US. We can work across all those standards. We have experience of working against those, so they're not new for us. And of course, we try to keep very current with the latest thinking and best practice by participating in various associations and working groups. So for example, we are on the subcommittee for the IES RP37, which is the apron floodlighting group in for North America, or for the US actually. It doesn't encompass Canada. And one of the things that we like to do is we like to share our knowledge and our experience with sector participants, whether that's the end users, whether those are our partners, whether it's distributors, design consultants, whoever that is. If they have an interest to learn, we'll happily share information, we'll provide our files in open format, we'll assist with lighting design. So really happy to share knowledge to avoid some of the early mistakes that happened in the aviation sector around, in the 10-year journey that we've been doing it. But just to add, importantly, though, even though 10 years doesn't seem like a long time, we were the original pioneers of LED floodlighting for apron application and high mast in general. So when we started this in 2009, 2010, the first projects being in Milan Malpensa, nobody was thinking about LEDs for high mast. People were still trying to install high pressure sodium and metal halides. So I think, as pioneers, we've been on that journey, we continue on that journey, and we really look forward to what's going to come in the next 10 years.
Great, thanks, Julian. I think that's really encompasses well what we're doing here today in these 7 lessons learned. It is imparting our knowledge onto you guys so you can understand some of the pitfalls that you might come across through the deep level of experience we have. So we mentioned at the very beginning that this was going to be an interactive webinar. And in fact, we're going to start right now before we go into these 7 lessons learned. And we have a very quick airport quiz for everybody on the webinar to join. So we're going to launch a poll. So if you're currently looking away potentially, or you're doing something in the background, it would be great if you could come back and face your screens, because we're going to show you 4 slides now, and there's going to be 5 different options of airports to choose from. Now, I'm hoping everybody can now see the poll in action, and if so, we can move to the slide. So all we want you guys to do is name the airport. So image A, with the poll, you have to select all the images in the poll at the same time. So we'll go through these 4 slides, but we'll give you all a chance to actually vote. So image A, if you can select one of the 5 options that are in front of you. You have Brussels, Tokyo, Schiphol, Toronto, and Paris. So I'll give everybody 30 seconds to make their choice. I think Yuli.
Which airport is this? That's what we're asking. Look at the picture and see if you can recognize which airport this is, and select one of the options in image A, and don't share it with everybody in the chat.
Luckily, that note in the chat is actually just to the panelists. So, okay, so that is image A. We're now going to move on to image B. So is this Hong Kong, Tokyo, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, or Sravan? How do you pronounce that, Yuli? Because this is Bangkok, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Suvarnabhumi.
Okay. And I'm hoping that everybody is able to see the polling options and is being able to select choices here. Okay.
I think we've got some people who are sending the answers in to the chat. Hopefully everybody can see the quiz on their screens now.
It may have taken a little bit of time to come up because I'm seeing that only 2 attendees have voted, and unfortunately we may be having some technical issues here with the poll, but let's see. We'll go on to airport C, where the choices are Heathrow, Chicago, LAX, Dallas Fort Worth, or JFK.
I'm getting some answers from Miroslav here. He's sending the answers into the panel. I'm assuming he can't do it, but I gotta say, very good answers so far. You've got a 100% track record, Miroslav.
And we are now on airport D. So the choices are, okay, it looks like everybody's now able to vote because all of these votes are coming in. Fantastic. So image D. So what I'll do is I will quickly go back through the slides so everybody can see them. This is better. I think everybody's now polling has come up. So we have image A.
Rob Roseman's asked, how about an I don't know option? Well, you have to pick one, which you have to have a guess. There's no prize at the end, unfortunately. So it doesn't matter if you get this right, just a little bit of fun.
Okay, and then image D again. Okay, we'll give everybody just another 20 seconds to get their answers in. I can see that almost half of the participants on the call have voted in this. So we will just give it a couple more seconds in case there were some technical problems at the beginning, give everybody a chance.
Michael, do we know how many people are calling in from a phone that they can't see a screen?
I do not actually at the moment, but I can see that we've already got 51% of people voted, which is a great number already. So I'm going to close this down in, oh, I've still got people voting.
Yeah, well, Wayne Hobcroft just wrote saying that he thinks he's probably got 4 out of 4 incorrect. No, Wayne, I'm sure you would have got at least half of them right. Hakan is saying that Michael's sound is very low. Hakan, hi, how are you? How is my sound?
Taking the headphones out, this must be better. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and let's see what the results are. So let's share the results on the screen. Hopefully this will now pop up and you'll see. So it looks like 70% of the people got image A correct. This is, of course, Amsterdam, Schiphol. Image B, 59% got it correct. This is Hong Kong. Image C, this was a tough one. Let me see what the results were. LAX, a very close call between LAX and Dallas Fort Worth on this one. So it was, in fact, LAX. And image D is pretty iconic. And yeah, 66% of people on the call got this right. It was London City. So I'm going to stop sharing the results and we can now kick off the webinar. But in fact, to start the webinar, now we've tested the poll, we are going to launch one more poll for everybody, because what we want to understand here is understanding who we've actually got on the call and the types of people who have dialed in. So hopefully you'll see another poll fired up for you guys. And there are 2 questions to answer here. The first is, have you actually completed an apron lighting project in the past? Now, this can be whether you're a client, you're a partner, or you're a consultant. The question is actually open to everybody, whether you've been involved, been part of, and taken part in an apron lighting project in the past. And then the next question is looking at the future. If maybe you haven't, or if you have, do you have plans to complete an apron project within the next 6, 12, 18 plus months, or whether you have no plans or it's not actually applicable to you? So we'll give it a couple of seconds to come in. So we just want to understand really the types and varied people we actually have on the webinar. And again, it just gives us an insight as Yuli starts to go through exactly how we've got. So we'll just give this another 10 seconds because we have almost 60% of the people already voted. And we'll share the results and we'll see who we've actually got on the webinar here today. Okay, 60% have voted. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, so it's a pretty much a 50-50 split here today. We've got 50% of people who have completed and 50% who haven't. So I think these lessons learned are going to be really valuable for both sets of audiences here. And it looks like people are still planning and working on projects on aprons for the future, which is a really positive sign, especially in the current climate, to hear that there are lots of projects that are still ongoing. So Yuli, I'm going to give you control, which you now should have, of the webinar. and ask you to crack on.
Okay, great. So when I press down, it should go to the first lesson. And the first lesson is, I'm going to set myself a little timer here so that I don't spend too much time talking on each lesson, because we're already 20 minutes into the webinar. So the first lesson is that apron lighting is really a design-led solution. Why do I say that? I think a lot of people who work in airports on the airfield are very familiar with AGL, which is airfield ground lighting. And these AGLs are quite standard products. So when you have a basic design done, for example, you have to place your taxiway edge lights here, you have to put a runway center line here, you have to have your stop bar over here. All the products that are going to be bidding on that project, they're all going to be standard. They're all going to be 8-inch or 12-inch. They're all going to be with a FAA or ICAO photometry that's set. And there's going to be very little difference in how they achieve that requirement. So whether you're buying your AGLs from OCHEM or ADB SafeGate, or you're getting them from TKH, or Eaton, Cruise Hines, doesn't really matter, because the output is going to be the same. They're going to be looking at other things, control system integration. You're going to be looking at lots of stuff. But with floodlighting, that's not the case. You can't say, well, a 600-watt floodlight from one manufacturer is going to behave the same way as a 600-watt floodlight from another manufacturer. In fact, they can be operating completely differently. And we do get quite often customers, end users, consultants, partners send us a bill of quantities and say, well, here's somebody's design. It required 123 400-watt floodlights. You have a 400-watt floodlight. Can you just give us a price for 123 floodlights, and we'll just assume that's your bid? And unfortunately, you can't do that, because all the floodlights are going to vary depending on their photometry. So how that curve of light, how that peak of light is coming out and how it lands on the ground is going to be invariably different from one manufacturer to another. You're going to have a different power output, or the different lumens that are coming out of the light. So, if I have a 700-watt floodlight and another company is producing an 800-watt floodlight, they could be having very similar light output in lumens. Okay, and that goes back to the efficacy. So you could have one efficacy. What is efficacy? Efficacy is the efficiency of useful light, the illumination on the ground. So you could have a 400-watt floodlight with the right optics, achieving a much better result than a 600-watt floodlight, which seems to be more powerful, more lumen output, but with the wrong optics would achieve worse results on the apron. And another important point is how those products perform over the time, or over the lifetime on the apron. Because we all know that LEDs degrade just like a sodium system, but not as much. But how much? What happens to them over time? And each different manufacturer will have a degradation curve that is not the same as somebody else's. So it's almost impossible to mix and match products, because you're going to have a different decay of light depending on how that system is built. And of course, the more time is dedicated to designing the system around the heat dissipation, around the way that the product is made, then the better profile of output you can have over its lifetime. So sometimes we get asked the question, well, can you assume that a midstream floodlight 600 watts is going to be similar to another brand's floodlight 600 watts? Well, you know what happens when you assume? You make an ass of you and me. And I always like to say that, because ultimately that's exactly what happens when somebody does a project and says, well, here we are, we installed these 400-watt floodlights because that's what was recommended, but we got them half price from another manufacturer, but the results don't work. Well, somebody made an assumption that they'll do the same thing, and it didn't work. So what is lesson one? Lesson one is really each project must be bespoke to the manufacturer of that product. So whenever you're comparing projects, make sure you have the full design output from each supplier so that you can understand what exactly they are saying on paper. Okay, because that's the first step of getting the process right, is ensuring that the paper from each manufacturer considers all its own assumptions within that project. So it's a design-led solution. Don't build an apron floodlight system without doing a design first. And if you're doing the design yourself, it's probably good practice to ensure that your manufacturer has verified that design, because maybe they have updated their lens profile, maybe they've identified some output issues, or in fact the efficiency has gone up. So it's always good to double check with the manufacturer on the latest photometrics and the latest results. So that's lesson one. It's always design-led, never just based on numbers. Right, so that takes us into lesson 2, does it? Yeah. Oh, okay, just here's an example of a bespoke solution. So I'll just spend half a minute describing this. So here we have an example of an apron on the right-hand side, and it's got an incoming Delta aircraft. And so we've sketched out what would be the aircraft stand, because remember, when it comes to meeting ICAO requirements, we are interested in aircraft stand predominantly. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on design aspects here, because that will be a different webinar by our technical director, Paolo Corno, who'll be talking about lighting design, and one of the things he'll look at will be an apron. But what my point here is that you can achieve the requirements of ICAO being 20 lux average light level and 4:1 ratio of uniformity of the average level of light to the minimum. But you can achieve that with, for example, 6 200-watt floodlights on each pole, or 3 400-watt floodlights on each pole. You know, probably you wouldn't be able to achieve it with 1 1200-watt, because you wouldn't be able to get the uniformity, and you have some spots and things. But you can almost achieve the results, but you can achieve them badly. So if you can have a large hole of, you know, big lots of light right at the top of the apron, you know, and you'll end up meeting and exceeding the requirements, but you could have a big hot spot in the middle and a very patchy apron. So uniformity is as important, for example, as the light levels themselves. So each manufacturer will try to achieve the results in their own way, and that's why it's important to get each one to do it. We've got a question here from Marcel. Greetings, Marcel. He asks, are the results of the calculation with or without airplanes in the reference field? And maybe, Michael, if you can just take a note of that question, and we'll tackle it at the end, because I think I'd just like to move on to the next point now. So lesson 2. So we've done a design now. So that's all good. We know that it works, it meets our requirements, and or exceeds them even. It looks good, it meets our budget. Let's get the project done. Okay, so now we install it, and here's time for another poll, which is, Michael, over to you. You have to unmute.
There we go. And yes, guys, any questions that are coming in, I can see we've also got some from a couple of other people based on lesson 1. We'll come back to those at the end, and we'll get them answered by Yuri. So we're going to fire up poll 3 now, which is all about testing and verification. So again, if you're looking away from your screen, if you can pull back and help us with this process. So there are 3 questions in this poll. The first is, who has tested their apron for compliance once it's installed? Who then went back and tested the apron within the last 6 months? And then who actually has a documented methodology for testing? So there are 3 questions within this poll, and I can see there's lots of answers coming in already. So thank you very much for being so quick with your answers in the poll, because I know we are very quickly running out of time. It's funny how it flies by, so appreciate everybody being so quick on this. And like I said, questions that are coming in, we will get to at the end at this point, I think, because of the time that we have. So we'll give everybody just another 15 seconds.
Yeah, so just to verify, we're not asking who specifically tested their apron in the airport. It's just basically asking, have you tested your apron for compliance once it's installed? Have you tested the apron the last 6 months? And have you got a documented methodology for testing? So we're asking who out of the people on our webinar, not who specifically has made that documented methodology in your departments.
Fantastic. So I'm going to close the poll down now. We've got almost 50% of people voted, and I'm going to share the results on the screen. So I think this is actually really interesting, Yuli. So 50-50, it's 50-50 between the people who have tested the apron for compliance once it's installed, and then a massive 80%, 79% of people haven't actually gone back and tested the apron with the 6 months. And I'm wondering whether answer number 3 about the methodology, which is 63% of people don't have a documented methodology, might be some of the reasons why these 2 first questions have come in this way. Did you expect these results from the first 2 questions for it to be?
Actually, I'm not surprised by the first answer. So 50% of people didn't test it once installed. We see that quite often. I'm at all not surprised by that fact that most people have not tested it in the last 6 months. I am quite surprised by the fact that 40% of people have said they have a documented methodology. That's a lot higher than I thought it would be, because generally what we found talking to our customers and end users is that, you know, there isn't a documented methodology for the testing. They know that they should test, but no one's actually made a document and kept a record of it. Or even if there's a record, there's no instructions as to how to really do the photometric testing every certain period of time. So what is that lesson? The lesson is very simple. For LEDs, we all know that heat is really the enemy. Okay, so that's why product design is so critical, but also it's important to make the products fit for their environment. So you're going to have a completely different challenge if you are in Canada than if you are in Oman or Jordan or the UAE. You know, so those are different challenges for the products. But what does that mean to the end user? And I'll give you some 2 examples here, really, which I think might just get that message home. And that is, we worked on a very complex project in Frankfurt Airport, and it was a large apron area with 3 stands with quite reduced heights of the masts. We had to install quite a lot of fixtures to reach the requirement, which, by the way, in Fraport the standard is 30 lux. So it's 10 lux more than the prescribed requirement from EASA, which is the European regulator. And so when we installed our products in December, a couple of years ago, we showed that the results were around 34 lux. And 6 months later, the airport called us and they said, we've done our biannual checks, and you've lost around 20% of the lumen output within 6 months. What's going to happen in a year? You're going to lose another 20%. I mean, this is disastrous. And of course, we were really surprised and disappointed, because before that, we had probably worked on 30 or 40 airport projects, and we hadn't seen or hadn't noticed such a lumen output drop. So we assumed that it could be a problem with potentially the product, potentially could be the site itself. Maybe there are some voltage drop situations happening on site. So we investigated, and Paolo had spent quite a lot of time on site himself, measuring and verifying and trying to understand. And what actually happened was that when we installed the product in December, the temperature was, -5 at night in Frankfurt, on that particular winter. And when we were doing the verification, we were up to 27, 28 degrees in the summer. And so we had that 30, 35 degree temperature change between one and the other. And so when we identified that it was in fact the ambient temperature that had an effect on the lumen output, that we lost between 15 and 20% lumen output, we understood that in fact, that's going to come back when we're back to December. So we agreed with Frankfurt Airport that we would indeed wait another 6 months to do the tests again, and they were back to the 34 lux that they started with. So what was that lesson? Well, that lesson was that let's not design things directly at the requirements. So if the question is, okay, we have 20 lux requirement by EASA, shall we design to 20 lux? No. Let's not design to 20 lux. Let's have a 15 or 20% safety margin for things like wide temperature changes, which could affect the performance of a product. And given the fact that we have one of the largest heat exchange surfaces in the industry, products which are less, designed with a smaller heat sink, with a smaller surface area, could suffer an even bigger drop, and it could lead to, in fact, some permanent damage on the LEDs. We've seen examples a couple of years ago in Schiphol Airport where some products were installed which weren't made very well, sort of in the early stages of LED production, and they had color shifted. So they moved to a green color after about 6 months of operating in the summer, and they didn't go back. So those products had to be removed because the heatsink just wasn't big enough to cool the LEDs in the color shifted. So testing that, but testing it smartly is important. We've worked with airports where the customers turned around and said, well, we've installed a new LED system and we're compliant with the requirements. And we've said, well, how do you know? And they said, well, we were told so by the supplier. Here are the lighting level results. And they demonstrate something from Dialux or a software output and say, here it is. It says that we're compliant. Now, that's the other point. There are, I think we have on the call here, Hakan Bayram from Istanbul Airport. When we were working on the Istanbul Airport project in the very beginning, and he'll be able to confirm this, Alex and I, we spent about a month living in Istanbul working on this, because the requirement was to install 2 test poles, and they mapped out an apron area for a code F stand. And they asked each bidding manufacturer to come in and install lights at their own cost and to demonstrate that they can reach the compliance with their design. And in fact, 8 out of 10 companies that installed the lighting on those masts couldn't meet their own design that they submitted. So what does that mean? It means that what they think they're going to get at the end of the project is not what they actually get when they install the products. And so that's why it's so critical to, once you have installed it, to check that it doesn't just meet the requirements, but it meets the design that has been generated, because maybe the generated design was to 30 lux and you just about meet requirements of 20. So it's important to test and to verify. So design, so we have a design, then we test it, then we measure, and then every 6 months, and we verify. And so we know that our light output is compliant 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 10 years later, once it's been installed. And that's indeed very important.
Yuli, we've had a question come in from Andreas. Does altitude affect testing and verification? You obviously mentioned temperature, but is it something that might be affected by altitude as well?
That's a question that I have to pass forward to Paolo Corno, because I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm assuming that we're going to have some airport customers potentially in South America, which are very high up. My gut feeling is that I don't expect it to be a big influence. And
your gut feeling is correct. Paolo has just messaged in to say no, altitude does not affect. So
good. Well, that's great. That's verified. And so that's I think that is. I'm just going back to that particular slide. I think that is the key lesson, is that you must ensure that you're testing and verifying your national regulator or the civil aviation authority in your country will prescribe how often it needs you to do that. But verifying and ensuring that works is very important.
Great. Okay, so we have another poll. So if, again, this is a real quick one for everybody because we're moving on to the next topic, which is based around glare. So has anybody received complaints about pilot glare on any of the projects that they've been working on, or just in general, if you are an end user, has this been something that's been brought to your attention? And again, there's lots of questions coming in, and I'm marking and flagging them all, and we'll get back to most of these towards the end, as time is once again flying by on this session. So we'll give everyone another 15 to 20 seconds to vote, and we'll find out whether anybody's received complaints about pilot glare.
So just while that's happening, I'm just going to tackle Marcel's question. He asks, this is Marcel from Holland, he asks, the lumen output, was it permanently in the cold, or did the lumen output restore in the summer? So it was a cyclical scenario. So in the output in the summer we saw a drop, and in the winter it went back up. So but just consider that, you know, that 20% drop went from sort of 34 lux to around 27, 28. So we didn't, you know, have an issue from a compliance standpoint, but obviously it just didn't hit customer requirements. So we've now, for example, in our company, have standardized for apron projects. Usually always we're using a 0.8 maintenance factor. So we already account in our designs for a 20% degradation, which may be as a result of climatic conditions. It might be as a result of dust or dirt accumulation on the floodlights. So really a small host of excuse me, various different things that could affect it. So we do think about it ahead of time.
Okay, so the poll results again are pretty split here. So 50-50 with regards to people on the call who received complaints about pilot glare. So I suppose, Yuli, why is pilot glare so important?
Well, you know, I think airport enemy number one, if we talk to the airports, when it comes to apron floodlighting, airport enemy number one is actually glare, because it doesn't, of course, primarily it affects pilots, and especially for airports which are receiving airplanes which are coming in on long haul flights. So the pilots are tired. They typically have been sitting in the night time for 2 or 3 hours before. And when they land and they are blasted into their eyes from very powerful floodlights with a high peak, but then of course it causes them a lot of discomfort. It could even create temporary blindness and can lead to accidents. So it really is something that's very important from a health and safety standpoint. But what is the lesson about that? Well, the lesson is that optics are so important when it comes to this application. You know, we really feel that in 9 times out of 10, when we're working on an airport project, we are using asymmetric optics, which deliver a low glare output compared to symmetric, and they typically have a full cutoff above the horizontal plane. So glare, you know, how do you measure glare? That's always a question. How do you measure it? It really is a combination of factors, and it almost has a number of conditions around glare which you have to take into consideration. So, for example, somebody's age, somebody's location, somebody's state of health. All of these things lead into a glare perception. There is a calculation you can do for glare, which are well explained in sort of European normatives, but glare itself as a perception is a little bit different. And so, asymmetric beams, those are ones which have a lower luminous intensity. That intensity peak is a lot lower because the light spread over a larger angle than the symmetric one. And so you can really reduce pilot glare and discomfort, not only to pilots, but also to ground staff, to passengers, by using a asymmetric optic compared to one which is symmetric. I can see that Paolo has joined the call. Does he want to say something maybe about
No,
this?
he's going to start answering some of these questions and typing the answers back to those people,
Great.
Stuart, Richard, who have been firing in questions. So he's going to type the answers in just in case we run out of time. I know a couple of people are adding questions into the webinar chat. We'll try and get to those as well, but feel free to also add them into the actual Q&A, and then we'll be able to type them up because we don't want to run out of time in this session.
Great. Just as a point, there's a picture of our Titan floodlight being assembled on the left, and that is in fact the lens array, which is our proprietary in-house developed highly asymmetric lens, which we've been using for apron applications. That's probably one of the main reasons that we've been so successful in this sector, having achieved more project references than any other company, is because of that particular highly asymmetric, low glare proprietary optic. I'm just trying to get to the next slide, Michael.
Sorry, I'll click you through. I think it's because we're going back and forth there.
Yeah, so here is a here's another image. So this is a product which is installed at London Luton Airport. London Luton Airport, it's one of London's 5 airports. And this just demonstrates how the product is installed flat to ground. So it's not tilted in any way. And that reduces upward light. And that is the correct way, the correct way to install. You really don't want to be installing lights in the airport like some kind of a stadium array. You really want to be keeping them as much as possible flat to ground and using optic lenses to achieve that angle of asymmetry to reach the back of the aircraft stand on the apron.
Okay, we're now moving into our 5th poll based around the quality of products that you might be looking to purchase in the market. So it's a couple of questions on this poll. First of all is, who's been faced with significant failure of their LEDs? And it's a very wide-ranging question, but it would be interesting to understand people's experience on the call with regards to any significant failures that they may have seen. And then the second question is, how would you describe your LED lighting experience to date? So again, we've given some options here. I understand that these are quite wide and some of them might not match up to your experience, but it's just to get a feel for how everybody on the webinar, whether using our products, whether using somebody else's products, whether even if you don't know which people's products you've had on site, how you describe your LED lighting experience. So it goes from obviously an amazing experience through to minor snags, tolerable issues, below average, major problems, or ultimately, if the question isn't actually relevant to you, we do have an option on this one for you to click on there. So great, we've had almost 50% of people voting, so I'll end the poll right now as we're looking at time, and we will share these results. So 66% haven't been faced with significant failure within their LEDs, which is a great number, I suppose. It's a relatively high number. However, seeing that 34% have, what are your thoughts with regards to that, Julie?
I'm probably guessing that those that have had significant failures are those which were very early generation LEDs. Those were ahead of the curve in installing systems. Technology has moved on. Systems are now more reliable. You know, our very first project, major project, was Gatwick Airport, and we had suffered some significant failures on the apron. But you know, we undertook to fix those immediately. We spent our own money to ensure that we could swap out those drivers for a more robust component. We paid for the contractor to go back on site and change it. You know, we lost quite a lot of money on that particular phase one. But you know, I think what Gatwick appreciated was the fact that we were quick to fix it. We learned from our mistakes. We knew at that point in time that we had to spend more time on selecting a supply chain that had a more robust component. So, you know, we learned the hard way. And I think those that suffered those failures were probably also in the early stages, or those that were driven primarily by budgets. So engineers, of course, would like to buy the best system, but the finance department quite often cuts budgets. And so when you've gone and bought a cheaper system, that's when you're likely to have had problems.
And it does look like with these results that 40% are saying that it was minor snags, and there's a failure rate there to be expected. Obviously, as you get down to the major problems and below average, there are significant problems there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing the results. I'm going to move this away and hand back over to you, Yuli, to expand on the idea of paying cheap.
Well, lesson 4 is really, I think a life's lesson, which is pay cheap and pay twice. And we've had so many horror stories that we've come across where somebody has installed a system that was driven primarily by budget and has had to scrap it and start again. So effectively paying for things twice. And we won't name the airports which we know have suffered that. But there are some examples which we can share of projectors really either going bad or suffering civil failure. So, on the right-hand side, everyone's probably looking at pictures. Here's an example from Milan's Linate Airport, where an LED projector just burnt out. So heat dissipation wasn't done properly on that product, and so the LEDs burnt themselves so much that they actually fell off the PCB board. Another project is the US Navy's air station called Sigonella. And that was a project that we fixed that now, but somebody decided to go the cheap route and install a bunch of small, cheap floodlights. And then within 6 months, they had, most of them had completely failed. Some of them had color shifted, some of them were completely off. And then they basically replaced everything under warranty, and the same thing happened. So it was, a year of suffering and pain. But then somebody approved a higher budget, and the system that was fit for purpose was actually installed there and is now working very well. Another example, on the bottom is a lot of rust that's building up around a product and so some heat management problems. So that's material. Materials are important, even if they are powder coated with a, some kind of marine paint. Invariably on an airport, you have jet blast and sand will scratch the paint off, and you'll have micro scratches, and the moisture will get in and rust and corrode, and it will damage the products. And here's one example of a product that was installed for a year that suffered significant corrosion and failure. And so, we always say stainless steel has got to be one of the things that you specify in your requirements, because at least you can ensure that rust is a thing that you don't have to think about again. So pay cheap, pay twice. Remember this, apron lighting is part of your critical infrastructure. Whether you're a military airfield or a civil aviation, when you're talking about things which are important for your safety, you would never compromise on quality. Okay? But people seem to think that apron lighting is okay. That's something where you can compromise on quality because you can reduce the cost. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think they are critical parts of the infrastructure. They are hugely important. And the cost of having a system that's low cost at the beginning, from a maintenance standpoint, from a safety standpoint, from an insurance standpoint, is also very important. Because if you have an accident on the airfield, and during that accident, the light levels were not up to the standards that are required by ICAO or EASA, whatever your national regulator requires, your insurance will be invalidated because you haven't provided a health and safety scenario, a health and safety compliant area. And so insurance is invalid. So that's obviously a real major cost to an airport for not doing things correctly. And remember also that premium products, all premium products, will of course typically outlast low quality products and low quality companies. Even if the products survive, sometimes the companies don't survive that are selling low quality products. And so you could have absolutely nobody else on the other end of the line when you have a problem with one or two products 3 years later. The company's already gone bust. So you have to make sure that not only are you buying from reputable companies, but also premium products to ensure you don't have horror stories 2 or 3 years down the line. And the other thing to remember is that contractors are looking to make margin. So That's the key. You know, they're trying to take your specification and reduce the cost to make a margin and replace certain products with lower cost ones. Just hold spec. That's important. If you hold your spec, you'll get what you want. I think we have to move quickly now. We only have 5 minutes left.
We do.
Let me just tackle this very quickly. So remote drivers versus integrated. Basically, we get asked this a lot. What is better, integrated drivers or drivers which are remotely located? So in the luminaire itself or down at the bottom of the mast or next to the product on top of the mast? And I think that markets have their own preferences. So UK, Italy, Germany, they all prefer drivers to be integrated. If you look at France, you look at USA, they prefer drivers to be remote, and that's what they're used with. But typically this is driven by maintenance cycles, you know, so how often do you do maintenance? How often do you expect to get access to those masts? But remember, habits are hard to change. It's so difficult to explain to the French that integrated drivers are more reliable. And likewise, it's very difficult to explain, you know, to somebody in the UK that it's just as good to have drivers at the bottom of the tower as it is at the top. So I think it's us as manufacturers that have to adapt to what the customer habits are, their requirements are. And each operator will have their own preferences as well. You know, in France, we've worked with an airport that wants integrated drivers. In the south, Lyon, are interested only in integrated, and that Paris is only interested in remote. So, you know, we will adapt, make sure as manufacturers, we should have both options available. And just remember one thing, surge arresters, you know, voltage spikes are a killer for LEDs because they're electronics. So where are your surge arresters? Are they close to the luminaire? Are they protecting it? That's something you have to consider all the time when you're designing airport apron systems.
Okay, great. And we're going to quickly fire up poll number 6, and we'll make this a fast one. It's luckily only one question, and this is all based around controls. So who has a dedicated resource responsible for actually controlling their lights? So Yuli, would you say this question is more aimed at our clients, the actual end user?
Yeah, I think this is more at end users or those that are working with end users. So design consultants or partners who work with end users. You know, when they're selling a control system, who's responsible for that control system? Do they expect the ATC, the air traffic controllers, to be responsible for apron lighting? Because quite often they don't want to hear anything about it. You know, on the de-icing station, there's a different set of lights. So, you know, but let's just jump through that quickly because it's not a critical question.
No problem. So we'll quickly share the results. A lot of people on the call, it's not applicable. These are probably a lot of our partners who are working on our behalf, but it looks like it's an even split with those who it is relevant to, yes or no. So what does that mean then with regards to the lesson learned?
So I'm just going to make this a very quick lesson. The point is that everybody thinks they want controls because it's you know, IoT is the name of the game today. It's very much in flavor. But when you're having controls, someone has to be responsible for controlling that system. Someone's got to be the owner. Someone's got to be trained. Somebody has got to be able to be on standby if things fail, if there's troubleshooting. So that's something to think about. You know, automation is good, but someone still needs to run it. So think about that when you are specifying lighting controls. Who is responsible for making sure that those controls are being utilized in the right way? Because they do come with a cost. So you don't want just to buy them and then have them on off during the day at night without any additional benefits.
Okay. And we are actually going to launch one final poll because it's a very, very quick one. And it's a bit of a fun question. For fog dissipation, what is more favorable, yellow or white light? Now, I spoke to Yuli about this one before the session, and he gave me what he expected the answer to be. So I'm really intrigued to see how this one comes out. And then we'll be able to move on very quickly to our final lesson before we close the session down.
Maybe I'll have to eat my own hat, Michael.
Maybe. And a note to everybody, if you have asked questions and you can stay beyond the hour, we're not going to be much longer, but we will quickly go through your questions and answers and share them with people. So if you can extend staying on the session a little bit longer, please bear with us. So I'm going to end the poll and let's see what the results are. So 64% have said yellow, and 36% have said white. What is the answer, Yuli?
The answer, of course, is that, well, let's say most people think it's going to be yellow, just like Paul said, but the answer is they are both the same at dissipating fog, i.e. badly, okay? So we all know that to get the greatest penetration of light through fog, you should have the longest wavelength possible. That's, of course, Raleigh's rule, but that doesn't apply to this, because fog droplets are, though smaller than cloud droplets, they're still huge compared to the wavelength of the visible light. And so the scattering of such light by fog is essentially wavelength independent. And we know that because if you just look at cars, car manufacturers have known for years that that's the case. Otherwise, all anti-fog lights would be yellow. Instead, you know, if you look at your anti-fog lights, they are now white, even though they used to be yellow 20 years ago. So the lesson is yellow and white light are equivalent. For perception of fog, color is not important. That is the final lesson.
Okay, fantastic. Well, if everybody can hang on, I'm going to quickly go through some of these questions we've had, because there's been some really interesting questions coming in, and we've got Paolo on the call as well. So we'll run through some of these questions. For those of you who have to drop up, thank you very much for staying on the call. Please look out for our future webinar invites, and we would really appreciate you answering the survey that's going to pop up when you close to help us continue the webinar. But whilst we have an extra maybe 5 minutes here, I'm going to throw some questions over. So question came in from Stuart Barron. How do you actually calculate your degradation? Oh, Yuli, you're on mute.
Michael, am I answering this, or who?
Yeah, if you can answer, that would be fantastic. Paolo's actually on mute. I'm not sure whether he'll be able to actually fire up his microphone. So if you can answer, that would be fantastic.
Can you just repeat the question, please, Michael?
How do you calculate degradation?
So degradation is, well, it's very simple to calculate in two ways. Firstly, you can do a photometric testing, where you send the product to the lab and you look at what was the initial output and what was the output after a certain period of time. Or the other way is to measure the actual lumens that you get on the ground. So it means once you've installed your lighting system, you've measured the lux levels, you come back in 6 months' time and you see that there's been a difference in lux levels. What has that drop been? Has that been a 2% drop, 1% drop, 10% drop? Ideally, you're looking at a 1% degradation per year. So it should be no more than 1% per year in light reduction.
Let me jump in. I managed to unmute my microphone. Hello, this is Paolo speaking. Yeah, I mean, what Yuli said is a very good practical way of measuring the light degradation. There are some normatives that give us a standard calculation so we can provide these projections to the customers. Mostly it's the LM80, which based on tests on the LED chips, which have to be at least 6,000 hours, will show the derating curve of the chip. That put together with a test called ISTM, which measures the working temperature of the various components within the luminaires. Those two data are put together into a model which is called TM21, which will give you how many hours will it take for your luminaire to drop 10, 20, or 30% of your light output. I have to say that with LEDs, these projections are, especially if it's a well-built product, these projections are very, very long. So, for example, most of the products we use for the aviation sector have an L90, which is above 65,000 hours. That means that after about 15 years of operation, the model predicts that the lamp could have lost a maximum of 10% of light.
Okay, thanks, Paolo. And if you both stay on, you can decide who might be best to answer. I'm actually going to go to a couple of questions that Paolo has already answered via typing, but I think they might be relevant to everybody on the call. Are there ways to actually mitigate glare? So this comes on the lesson learned about glare. Are there ways to mitigate glare?
Well, yeah, glare can be mitigated. Well, the best way to mitigate glare is to do it at the project stage. So when doing a lighting simulation, you decide the aiming of the luminaire. Each luminaire has a peak of its photometric. That's where you will get the maximum source intensity. So that's the point where, looking at the luminaire, you will see it the brightest. Avoiding to point those peaks in key areas like, for example, a stand entry or a taxiway turning point. So when the pilot is going to be looking around, will avoid glare straight away from day one. Sometimes it's impossible to do this just by orienting. So a very effective way is to include mechanical shielding of various degrees. And a basic rule is that the closer you have tilts to zero, so if you have lamps parallel to the ground, that's where the glare should be the lowest.
Okay, and still on the glare, because it was another question that came in, how do you actually calculate glare on the schemes?
So there is a tool in all the lighting calculation software which is called a GR Observer. GR Observer is a point that it's included in the simulation, where basically we put a virtual person in the coordinates we decide, which again could be the key points like stands entry or taxiways, or we even simulate the ground staff. And this GR Observer will calculate different variables like the luminance of the source, veil light intensity, and will give a parameter which should be universally used to calculate glare, even though it's not really precise. But anyway, when you get a value below 50, you're basically sure that it's going to be a comfortable light. I mean, for this type of application, then every type of application have a different recommended glare level. But GR50 for airfields is what's recommended.
Okay, great. A really interesting question actually has come in around actually measuring lux levels and that process. And I think this could be something that we should develop a further webinar on potentially. But how do you actually measure lux levels, and what's the process? And I'm guessing this isn't a simple 30-second answer, but if you can provide some information, that would be great.
Well, we can make it quick and say so. Well, the basic idea in measuring light level is that you have to identify your target area, which in this case is one aircraft stand, and depending on how much time you have available to do this test, you lay out a grid of multiple points. So you move with your lux meter, one parallel to the ground at the ground level, and a tripod with another lux meter sensor mounted vertically to measure vertical levels in two directions. Move to all these points, get your measurements, and you calculate your average. And taking your minimum value, you divide it by the average, and that's where you get your uniformity ratio.
Okay, great. And I think that Yuli, we're looking at building a training and a documentation around this process, aren't we? With something that we'll be able to support the industry with in a very particular way. That's correct, right?
Yeah, we're almost finished with our photometric guide document, which will allow end users, also design consultants and our partners, to really have a process which clearly defines how to measure lux levels, how to record them, what considerations need to be taken when doing photometric testing, what regulation it relates to, so that they can cross-reference things themselves as well.
Great.
We've got an excellent, actually on that point, we've got a interesting question from Richard here, Richard Walls, who says, when completing photometric calculations in the design software, what temperature are the fixtures files fixed at in the IES files? Paolo, I think that's an answer that you'd love to answer. You might have answered already.
Yeah, well, all the photometric testing is done per standard at 25 degrees ambient temperature with zero air movement. This is both for the LM79 standards and for the European standards, so it's uniform.
So that's 77 Fahrenheit for those who are operating in Fahrenheit.
Great. Well, we're going to close the webinar down now because we are 11 minutes over. Anyone who hasn't had their questions answered, We will go through the Q&A and populate these and make sure we share with all attendees the questions and answers that we provided, so everybody can learn from some of the Q&A that came in.
It's such a shame. There are some really great questions here that we'd love to just tackle, but yeah, we are short of time and people do probably have other schedules and things to get on with.
So we'll type all these up and we'll share them with everybody. So thank you so much for getting involved in the Q&A. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for participating in the polls. Like I said, please give us your feedback at the end. The quick 4-question survey will pop up, and it literally is 4 very easy to answer questions, but it will really help us develop this series as we go. Thank you to Yuli. That was fantastic. Really appreciate you joining us today. And Paolo for jumping on at the last minute and helping answer some of these questions. We really, really appreciate it. So we will be sending out some follow-up emails. You'll also get an invite to next week's webinar shortly, which hopefully will be of interest to many of you as well. Thank you once again for joining us.
People are free to share, Michael, aren't they? People are free to share this seminar link to or webinar link to anybody they want.
Absolutely. I'll provide the recording in the emails post the session. And if you think it'll be valuable to any of your colleagues, you can simply share the link. They'll be able to register and actually watch the recording. So feel free to share, and thank you for joining webinar 1 of the Midstream Lighting Webinar Wednesday series.
Stay safe and see you down the road.
Bye, everyone. So